today's event we have Wong Chen, Rafizi Ramli and Nick Nasmi, which is something that closely aligns with MPUK's purpose. MPUK wants to make political conversations matter again. So we value political opinions, observations, representations, ideas in whatever form. And operating under this climate of fear and intimidation, what MPUK strives for, therefore, is to make these conversations and discourse more normal, so they could allow to be matured and flourish. So the purpose of this talk today would be to fulfill those aims, and with other activities that MPUK has done since September. So the purpose of this event in particular is to make sure that we talk more about substance and less about rhetoric, and also allow the opportunity for us to demand the kind of politics that we want to see. So how we're going to do it is very closely aligned to the structure which I will introduce now, which is that we are going to ask this question constantly for the first hour, and I'll be doing the moderating part. I'll be asking, what if PKR was in power? What would they do on that particular issue? So it forces politicians to confront those issues more directly. It also allows our imagination to have more tangible understanding. So constantly I'll be going through many facets of issues, and hopefully we'll be able to get those kind of answers that we want to. Then we're going to take a 5 minutes break after that 1 hour, and then it's going to be full-on Q&A from all of you. And that's when it fully portrays the kind of the objective of being your event as much as it is ours. So we have YB Wong Chen. YB Wong Chen is a member of Parliament we have YB Rafizi Ramli. And we have YB Nasmi. And State Assembly person for Sri Suket. So I'll be addressing them without the YB formality as well, because just to break that barrier of so much formality, so much feudalism, be able to ask the questions that you want to ask. You should be able to, because this is the democratic extension, right? You should be able to ask people the questions, especially when they are elected by you, right? So the first issue is on economy, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. Okay, I'm standing not because I'm vertically challenged, but because we're not like on a higher platform, so they might have to stand as well so that everyone could see. The first issue is on Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, TPPA, that was recently passed by Parliament. So my question is, the governments and all proponents of TPPA talks about how it opens the economic opportunities to a market of 800 million people, higher wages overall. So my question is, what if PKR has power? How would they make sure that we are still economically competitive internationally if we don't sign the TPPA? Because that's the position of PKR, which is against TPPA. So if YB Wong Chen could answer that.
Okay, first, PKR doesn't take an ideological position on TPPA. We looked at it from purely data, and we looked at the numbers, the economic numbers, and then by comparison, we decided that the cost-benefit, the cost outweighs the benefit. And on that position, so on that position, we basically rejected it in Parliament. But let's fast forward 2 years from now when it's fully implemented. Because what TPPA does is, after you ratify it probably on the 4th of February, you have about 2 years to implement the thing, which means you have to amend all the laws and say in 2 years' time we win the election, what will we do? From a practical point of view, we cannot exit the TPPA when we change government. Yeah, that's my position. I think we have to respect sanctity of contract, that's important. But then we have to look again, because there's an exit clause. There's an exit clause for about 6 months, 6 months notice. But even if we do exercise that clause, I think what we need to do is at least stabilize the issue by 1 year. look at the data coming in and see whether trade actually increases or not. If it doesn't after a year or 2 years, we have to walk out. Because primarily, I think the TPPA is driven by geopolitical reasons rather than economics. So we have to be very careful that we do not overstep the issues and we do not go into dark waters. What I say, when I say dark waters, I mean we are changing foreign policy. Malaysian foreign policy has always been neutral. We are a trading nation. We depend on exports and we depend on trade. But if we go into geopolitics blindly, we might upset the China trade. We might upset the fact that in most probability China will be the superpower in that region. So we have to look at that. Yeah?
My next question is for Rafizi. So Rafizi has been against the goods and services tax, which is around 6%, that has been proven quite burdensome for the rakyat. So my question is that if PK was in power, will they not believe in an efficient, business-effective taxation regime?
That's precisely why GST is not helpful, because you can only implement GST at a certain stage of an economy, at the time when if you were to implement GST, it does not add cost to business, and at the same time you can transfer the tax cuts to as many people as possible. Principally, GST should not be an additional tax. GST is just a more effective way to tax, because when you come to a certain stage when everyone has to pay tax, if you still rely on income tax regime, you have to rely on computation and assessment, and there comes to a point when bureaucracy cannot manage. So that's why having GST now running in parallel to the income tax regime actually adds a lot more burdens to the businesses at the time when GST cannot offer that synergy to make sure that it simplifies the tax regime to the government. So even if you remove this whole emotional issues about how GST is burdensome, GST at the current stage in Malaysian economy actually makes it a lot more difficult, and it adds cost to the business. So the most logical way is to very quickly abolish GST. What you need to do then is to make sure that your tax regime, the existing tax regime, we have to approach from a fresh perspective, because the whole of our tax regime, income tax regime, investment tax regime, these are based on the thinking in the 60s and 70s, when we really needed to attract actually quite low value businesses into Malaysia. We just needed any investment. So everything is given investment tax allowance. 50 years later, when by right Malaysia should be moving into higher economy, our taxation regime, especially the incentives, are still based in the thinking of the 60s. So I don't think you have to really go big. You just have to make sure remove GST, and when I say remove GST, we can't actually repeal it, because businesses and governments spent about 5 billion in the last few years just to put the system in place. So it's very irresponsible to go and say, sorry, we have to revert to a different tax and you have to learn and install new software and new systems. So you have to go on with the current GST systems and accounting, so that they don't have to change anything. But what you do is just put a zero return on everything. If there is a point in the future, 5, 10, 15 years from now, that our economy is ready for GST, then it's very cheap and very easy to just vary the rate all over again. And then make sure that we have to review the whole approach to income tax, investment tax, think about capital gains tax. Then I think that kind of tax regime will be more suited to the stage of our economy now, it can then be effective to bring us to the next level of economy that we want, which is high value.
Rafi, just on another emotional point and another more efficient system. So the current petrol prices are based on a floating system, sort of. So if PKR was in power, how do they make sure that, and what kind of system would they use for petrol prices?
I think we have to go back to the previous system of subsidy. A lot of people are so dogmatic about subsidy, and they say, you know, this very traditionalist view that subsidy is just bad because resources are not allocated efficiently. You know, and of course, the argument that you hear from Najib nowadays is that you have to be very targeted about your subsidy. You know, these are textbook answers, which does not reflect the reality on the ground. You can only do targeted subsidy and have the desired results if the targeted group is small. Then you can concentrate on that. Our society, judging by BRIM recipients, because subsidy was removed and replaced by BRIM. BRIM is considered as targeted subsidy. 80% of our households receive BRIM. When you have the targeted group, basically everyone is entitled to that targeted subsidy. Surely you know that something is wrong. You know, we are not at the stage where you can talk about targeted subsidy because the household income, the economic situation at the household level is still very bad. So I think we have to go back to the previous APM, which actually worked well for over 30 years. You must put a subsidy element to it, but you can be quite practical and flexible about how do you determine the subsidy. The previous APM system, the government will set a fixed price and therefore will top up in terms of subsidy depending on the costing. If it goes up, if the cost is above the set prices, then you have to reimburse the petrol companies. If it goes down, then you collect from the petrol companies and consumers as tax. You know, one of the ways that maybe we are considering is that you just make sure that there is a fixed amount of subsidy. So the prices may actually move over time, not as often, but maybe over a period of 1 or 2 years, maybe move one or twice, so that it is not too far away from the prevailing market price. But there's always an element of subsidy, because when you lower down petrol prices and then you make sure that you use all the available laws on profit sharing that actually are in existence but are never used by BN, then I think you will be more effective in reducing the cost of doing business. That works better because hopefully then you can normalize and reduce prices, because energy is the biggest component in cost of doing business. Prices hopefully will go down, and then the monthly bill of every household definitely will be knocked out by at least, you know, if you give 30 cents and you use 300 liters per month, at least your bill will be reduced by 90 ringgit per month.
Nick, so mahasiswa lapar is this new trend where people are talking about how the students in Malaysia don't even get to eat one proper meal a day. So even if they do get one meal, it would be instant noodles. So that reflects the larger problem of youth unemployment, high cost of living, overburdening student loans. So if PKR was in power, how would they directly tackle these issues, and are there any measures you have here to tackle problems relating to the youth?
Okay, Assalamualaikum and a very good evening to everyone. Okay, I think the problem that you have today is because as a result of BN running the economy to the ground, as a result of the corruption, as a result of the wastage, you see where education takes becomes a huge victim to the policies of Barisan Nasional. So that's why you see today, you have the scholarship issue of the JPA scholarship issue. You have the issue of 1.4 billion ringgit being cut from universities, public universities. You have 15% being cut on PT-PTN at a time when the cost of living is rising. So these are real issues on the ground. And that's why you have the phenomenon of mahasiswa lapar. And I think Rafizi was the one who mentioned in a ceramah, if in the 70s it took the students to speak out about the hungry farmers in Baling, today perhaps the farmers in Baling have to go and speak up about the hungry students in the university. And that's why PKR, we are committed. I think in the last election, our manifesto is to provide free education and to abolish PT-PTN. And we believe that it can be done with the correct political will. The amount last election we calculated, I think was what, 5 billion a year. And if you consider that's the price of free education, to give education free to all your students, whether they are in public or whether they are private universities, I think that is something that is very doable. So it can be done with the correct political will. Of course, now we have to look back at the numbers with the current economic situation and all that, but I believe that if you have a different type of leadership, this can be done.
Alright, let's talk about corruption. The 1MDB scandal must be familiar to everyone for the past year. So the recent rationalization of the assets by the CEO of 1MDB, Arukanda. So the picture is that things are solved now. The 42 billion ringgit isn't that big of a deal. So, but my question is that to Wong Chen, what if one of your top leaders were implicated in one of potentially the largest scandal ever? What would have been done if PKR was in power?
If we're in power, there wouldn't be such a top leader. But no, yes. If the person is in a position of power and is extremely corrupt, say for 1 million or 10 billion or whatever it is, we just have to prosecute him. I mean, it's quite simple. But before we do those kind of things, we have to make sure that he is taken care of financially, not to make him extremely rich, but he has to be sufficiently paid. Somewhere I would imagine CEO pay of a listed company minus 30%. So don't pay him $10,000 a month and give him a 250 billion budget. You can't do that. You have to pay him at least R1 million or $500,000 a year so that he can have a decent life. Therefore, he's not tempted to do corrupt activities. Now, if you don't pay him that, then he, as a politician, we have to save money for election. It's not just pay our wives, bring our kids on holiday, put them to good school, and all that kind of thing. So if you don't solve the underlying problem of corruption, which is basically lawmakers are underpaid, then you are giving them incentive to cheat. They will look for ways, because of the immense power that they have, approving projects, having contracts, sitting in the tender board, so on and so forth. If you don't solve the underlying problem, it's extremely difficult to fully prosecute. Yeah? Pay them well, then if they step out, hammer them.
Wong Chen, what will you do with the 1MDB company itself? Like, before everything else, if you've discovered a company under such debt, the state...
No, we just use the basic corporate activity, because 1MDB is actually a corporation, it's not really a body. We go through the restructuring, and then if the restructuring fails, then you just close it down. I mean, you put it under receivership. But the clear issue here is you have to publish the accounts. You have to acknowledge you have a problem. Because the investors out there are looking at it as an emblem or as a problem regarding the entire government. Right? Because if 1MDB has such a high profile, where the Prime Minister is the chief advisor, then they're thinking, hey, how's Tabung Haji doing? How's the other GLCs, how are they being run? You see? So the best way from a public relations exercise for the government is to come absolutely clean, clear it out. If you cannot rescue it, just close it down, take the loss. I mean, you can absorb, I think, easily 10 billion losses. It's not a big problem for the country. Yeah? But what we cannot get away with is to allow this corporate attitude to continue. There must be no corporate impunity. So it's essential that we shut it down and then prosecute people fully for all the mistakes. That's how you're going to get back investor confidence.
Hello? Yeah, Rafizi, you have been one of the top whistleblowers before you joined politics and even now. So there are a series of them that you have exposed, like Yapim, the Islamic Economic Foundation, the Mara scandal where they bought property in Australia, National Feedlot Corporation, your favorite, KWAP, Tabung Haji, and a series of them. So this reflects a larger entrenched sense of dishonesty probably in governance. So my question is, and you've once talked about this a bit, that when you come into power, you won't go after every person who has been corrupt in the past. So we have people who are corrupt at the top, as well as the police who are corrupt. So if Bigger was in power, would they go after each person? If not, then what?
Okay, I'm beginning to feel that I'm in a school debate. So I will gather my thoughts and take my breath and answer slowly. See, we have come to a situation where corruption is very pervasive, and you can't really fault the lower level civil servants. Especially now, if they think, if they think the Prime Minister got donation, it's a different thing altogether. But even then, they wouldn't get donation. So if they feel that people at the top and they encounter this day in and day out are taking from the public huge sum of money, of course it's very easy to justify, of course taking 50 or 100, 150 is okay. So I think there must be a recognition that corruption is no longer a personal problem, it is a systemic problem. The moment it becomes a systemic problem, then I suppose you have to be a bit more pragmatic, because you have to strike a balance between making sure that you get the buy-in of the anti-corruption tough measures that you have to roll out, yet at the same time, for the sake of justice, as well as to really send the right message, go after all those big camps. And I'm sure statistically, if you were to have a study and plot the amount of corruption that happens at the lower level compared to the ones at the top, I'm sure it's 80-20. 80% in terms of value of what the country and society lose every year is basically, most probably, committed by 50 people in Malaysia, I think. 20% is by, that 10,000 civil servants, police and whatever. And also corporate corruption and so on. So I think we have to draw a line for the sake of, you need to have a sense of proportion because we need to move forward. There cannot be a feeling that people are persecuted or witch hunting. You need to have the bulk of society feeling that we are moving forward. And for that, I think you can't run away from thinking about amnesty. There must be an amnesty law. My opinion is that every civil servant would be given an opportunity where you can declare if you had taken corruption, what's the amount, and so on and so forth. And below a certain amount, the people who belong in that 20% population of small-time corruption, once they make that declaration, and it's a confidential declaration, that mistake and corruption will be forgiven. Of course, if they were to repeat it, then of course they will be subjected to the tough laws. But you can't run away from coming to terms and getting a closure to that big corruption, the 20% of that. And corruption is not just about literally taking money. Corruption now is getting extremely complicated. If you look at 1MDB, when I explain to orang kampung, because it's very difficult to explain to them the whole scandal, I have to give an example that if you think it is more like a football game because the ball is being passed from before it's being shot into someone's pocket, they structured it in such a way that it's very difficult for you to trace and to spot caught red-handed. You have to come to terms with it. There must be a formal investigation, there must be prosecution, and there must be appropriation of whatever money that we think they have taken from the public. Only then, I think, you can strike a balance between moving on positively as a society, but making sure those who really take money from the public pays, and that goes not just about prison terms, but I think we should be talking about confiscation and appropriation of their assets.
Rafizi, you have also been looking into tabung haji lately, so could you give us some latest scoop on what's up?
Well, there are 2 or 3 issues, I think, about tabung haji. And I think we have to start with a fundamental issue, even before you go into the nitty-gritty of the financial details. What is tabung haji? Tabung haji is where 8 million mostly poor Muslims keep their money so that they can have a shot at going for Hajj. For those who don't know, the cost now is about 15,000 ringgit to go for Hajj. Some people have to save for 20, 30 years before they can have an opportunity. And on top of that, things are very difficult now because you have to wait for your queue. If you are born today and you register to go for Hajj with tabung haji today, you can only go 50 years from now. That's the reality. So you have to understand morally what is tabung haji to these people. It's a long way. It's where they, if they don't have to go to Hajj, they wouldn't put their money there. They actually cut whatever they can cut so that they can put their money in tabung haji. Because if they don't start early, they will never go to Hajj because you have to wait 40, 50 years. That you have to understand. Because of that, almost every Muslim in Malaysia will have a tabung haji account and will keep at least 1,500 or 2,000, because when you fall below that, then you are disqualified. Your queue is taken by someone else. Therefore, morally, you should be extremely careful with this money. I cannot accept, for example, that you take money from these poor people and 5 years later, you end up less with what you collected from the people, which is what is tabung haji today. Depositors put 54 billion ringgit. The actual money left is actually short by 351 million as of 2014. I expect by the time the accounts come out within a year for 2015, I think they'll be short by 1 billion. You can talk to the ministers, you can talk to Aziz, and you can talk to the corporates. It's only 1 billion. You will recover investment here and there. You go and talk to your makcik and uncle who's loaned it up for 50 years, putting their money, only to know their 2,000 ringgit investment, money they kept to go to Hajj, is lost. It's simply not acceptable. You go to anyone, everyone will say the minimum expectation of tabung haji is that you must maintain whatever you collect from the public, which is not the case now. So that's the principal issue. Whatever they say and whatever they want to spin out of that financial statements, they cannot get over the moral issue that you have taken the money and you have lost the money. Then, the second part is basically the very bad, successively over the last 15 years, very bad investment decisions. I can give you a few examples which I have to make them accountable in the next 1 or 2 weeks. In 2007, Tabung Haji bought Ramunia. I don't know how many of you in the oil and gas. Ramunia is one of the players in oil and gas. They are fabricators. They do jackside, topside, and so on. So they took over Ramunia and they paid RM1.70 per share. At the time when everyone was already very worried that something is wrong with Ramunia. So they bought up to 30%, and it's because they were buying Ramunia, the shares went up, 1 year after that, Ramunia tumbled. By 2011, Ramunia is PN17 company, virtually bankrupt company. So they've already lost a few hundred millions, I think 300 millions for a 30% stake in a company which was about to go down under envy. Then they got stuck again. They injected another 300 million in 2011 to bring it out of PN17, rebrand it as TH Heavy Engineering. This is the one in relation to the leak internal document that Tabung Haji gave a corporate guarantee to TH Heavy Engineering at the time when you are not in a position to do it because you're not even a majority shareholder. You're just it's just an associated company, 30% holding. Now, they injected 300 million. Now, 2015, last year, I think the last financial year end, 2014, TH Heavy Engineering registered a loss of about 300 million. Now they are stuck. They've already put about 600 million. And oil and gas is going to tumble. It's really coming down. It's a downside cycle. Prices is going to stay low for the next 5 to 6 years. There will no be job. There's no jobs anymore. What do you do with PH Heavy Engineering? If they pump more money is lost. If they cut the losses, that's 600-700 millions of depositors' money lost. I mean, someone has to be accountable to this. And another example, very quickly, because it's already killing me. Another really perfect example of how things went so badly and they went around wasting depositors' money with impunity is the Silverbird or Hi-Fi. You know the Hi-Fi bread company? Yeah? Hi-Fi bread company was once sort of owned by Vincent Tan and Jason something and so on in 2007 and 2008. Suddenly there was a lot of hype of activity and hype about, this is going to be a really big company and so on. Tabung Haji then went in and buy the company, and the share was RM1.20 at that time. That's the amount that Tabung Haji paid in 2007. By 2009, the share price dropped to about 50 cents. And they had to close for 2-3 months because of hygiene problem and so on. By 2011, they went into PN17. By 2012, Howard Clark, the auditor, basically passed going concern audit, so it had to be closed down. And by 2013, the directors of Hi-Fi and Silverbird were charged for embezzlement of money to the tune of 164 million. Obviously, by now, Tabung Haji would have lost easily 200-300 million on that company. Another example. So to conclude, I don't think all this a series of bad investment decisions, one after another, that by now would have cost depositors easily 2 billion ringgit. I don't think this is a naive mistake. Some people in a position of influence in Tabung Haji colluded with whoever basically to buy this company so that they make money knowing that this company has no value anyway. But because they treat the depositors' money with impunity, because all this while, none of this matter, because you will not go to the press and it's just a business news in the Age or the Star with no one paying attention. Not anymore, you know. So clearly there must be corrupt practices, collusion. People know, I will buy your company at that price, although the value is a lot lower because I will take 50 and you take 50. That's how it's done. That's how it's done all these years. And I don't know how long this has been going. It has to stop. What we cannot do, to conclude, is just to gloss everything and say, you know, we must defend Islamic institutions. Go to hell. I'm not going to fall for that, you know. Because that's their defense. They will say that this is a DAP agent trying to run down Tabung Haji. No. If you want to save the depositors' money, you have to stop this. You have to get to the bottom. Those people who fix all these investment mistakes, if possible, you have to bring them to justice. And of course, this has not stopped. The latest ones, the problem, the current ones that really running Tabung Haji to the ground is of course involvement and transactions with 1MDB. Apart from the 188 million piece of land that they bought, I think 1MDB, Tabung Haji actually have 1MDB bonds to the tune of close to 2 billion ringgit. Who is going to pay this? Who is going to give back 2 billion ringgit to Tabung Haji when 1MDB has sold Bandar Malaysia to the private company and to the Chinese? The 2 billion is still owed to Tabung Haji and they still have not sorted out who is going to pay Tabung Haji that bond that was issued by Bandar Malaysia and 1MDB. So I think this has to go because it can only stop if the public takes a very strong stand and be very cruel to these people. Then I think they know that, okay, you cannot go near Tabung Haji anymore because otherwise they will continue to play with poor people's money with impunity as they have done for the last donkey years. Thank you.
Thank you. The Prime Minister has been recently cleared of the 2.6 billion ringgit that went to his personal account by the Attorney General. So this was somehow, to some people at least, an extension of how our institutions are slowly being compromised. So the MACC, the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, then there's this Parliamentary Accounts Committee, and also the cabinet shuffling. So it doesn't seem that institutions seem to be as independent as possible. My question is that, is there anything that, any measures to be done to make sure that these don't happen? Or is it just quite dependent upon the DNA of the politicians? So it's like, we're just unlucky that we've got this group of people who are, you know, quite dishonest with their conduct.
The short answer is you have to change the government. Because I think, because they've been in power for so long and they take things for granted. And there's this sense of complacency and being comfortable. So they think that, you know, no matter what they do, you know, the things that Rafizi mentioned just now, no matter what they do, no matter what, how they treat the rakyat, how they treat the people, you know, they can get away with it. You know, they can get away with murder, literally. So that's why I think, no pun intended. So yeah, so I think that is why. I mean, it's not a question of DNA. It's not a question of who we have in power right now. But as long as, even if you change the Prime Minister, but if you have the same plot in power, if you do not see political change and a political change that brings into power a party that can bring political reform as its main agenda, then you will continue to see this to happen in the country.
Wang Chen, you talked a lot about terrorism laws, so Prevention of Terrorism Act, as well as the recent National Security Council bill. My question is simple, that if PKR was in power, do they not think that there are certain moments when there are growing international threats of terrorism, that some fundamental liberties can be justifiably compromised?
Actually, yeah, this terrorism thing is not my specialty. Let's be absolutely honest. Because during the parliamentary session, some MPs were not really focusing on the matter, so I was sitting next to Raja Barre, who is the Amanah MP, and we decided, let's go and do a press conference every day on the issue, just to highlight the thing. That's how I got stuck with it. But I do know the issues. I do know that there are times when we need to suspend civil liberties. But the Malaysian Terrorism Act, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, POTA, is completely different. It's not even anywhere close to the Australian model or the British model. I think the British has 21 days where you can detain a person without trial, and the Australian have 14 days, right? Ours is indefinite. Ours is every 2 years renewable until until the end of the world, I suppose. So it's not that we're against POTA. We understand, right? But there are limitations. So when I spoke to one of the diplomats early on, and I won't mention which country, but I did tell them, look, if you support this or if you don't have a good chat with the Prime Minister, we will be breeding terrorists. Because in the Northern Ireland experience where they had suspended civil liberties, they put people in jail for 6 months, a year, 5 years. What happened was their cousins, their brothers, all become terrorists. You know, they all went and fought against the British government. So having repressive law actually breeds terrorism. So I told this to the diplomat, and then the diplomat told me, hey, Wong Chen, cannot. Malaysian police not very good. If you don't give them this power, they cannot arrest anybody at all. So they've got a different idea out there. So it's to some extent, it's probably true. So whoever the special branches, sorry lah, brother. No, to be practical, I think the maximum that we can do where we suspend the civil liberties for people and detain them without trial in this context that the Malaysian police is not so efficient is probably 90 days. I won't even go further than that. I think that is something that I can just about stomach for in the Malaysian context. Yeah. So the question is on terrorism, right? Yeah. So I would we'll go back to the drawing board. I'll become the government. We will pass a new amendment to reduce it to if possible 60 days, if not maximum 90 days. I think that's the numbers we have to look at. And if the government improves its intelligence, then we will slowly reduce it back to the ideal 21 days or 14 days.
Intelligence as in...
Intelligence gathering, pay the police better so that they're less corrupt, those kind of things. Get them better equipment. We have to do both, not just pass it on. Okay?
Alright, Rafizi, so part of the tour that we have is that tomorrow we're going to Manchester and Monday we're going to Bristol. And the title of the Bristol tour is The Malay Politics. Well, this is something that Rafizi talked about, where the Pakatan agenda would be changed to address the Malay fears. So I was wondering, what are those Malay fears that Rafizi was talking about, and if they were in power, how would they address those fears?
I think the segment of our society all is well, and sometimes I reflect because I can be very candid about it. Sometimes a segment of our society, especially the middle class, the urban, the non-Malay section of it, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about how Malay voters vote and think. There's really a gap and disconnect between what really motivates Malay voters with how this is perceived generally by middle class, urban, and so on. So over the last few years, there seems to be a belief that the Malays who support the current regime are the poor ones, and they survive on handouts and dream and so on. And that attitude and misconception, I think, makes it very difficult for us to really tackle the issue, and unless you resolve that issue, change is not going to happen, because numerically, Malays will decide the general election, as simple as that. A rough estimate now, I think generally it is accepted that if there is an election tomorrow, the non-Malays will, majority of it, up to 90%, will support opposition. The Malays will be split into 4 if there is a multi-corner funds. You will have a 20% hardcore for UMNO, a 20% hardcore for PAS, and 20% hardcore for Pakatan. These are basically the hardcore supporters, the party members, the activists, who will not sway either way anyway, because it's their party. What is most key is that 40% fanciers, Malay. Whichever they go will basically decide the next general election. Now you have to understand this very important group of people. My interaction and our focus group and so on, and I've been impressed so many times internally within Pakatan. It is extremely wrong to say that these are poor Malays who just vote for BN because they get handouts. It's not true. The number of Malays who support UMNO actually appears to be quite consistent in all the demography, urban or rural. The only difference is usually by age. The younger ones usually are not as tarat as the old ones. So you see higher support for opposition relatively for the younger ones, but very high. But there is no, the data so far, based on the last general election, as well as ongoing surveys from time to time, clearly shows that actually the Malays generally, across the board, do not support opposition. And the answer is actually quite sad, because when you sit down with them and you ask, are you not suffering? It's like, yeah, silakan aja. They will say that, And you ask again, what's the problem? I can't pay that, I have to cut that, things are very bad. If you are going to vote tomorrow, who are you going to vote? They will say, lah, Najib ni teruk, gini, tapi saya tak nak JP, for example. Why? Because nanti Melayu tak terjaga lah, problem, Malay will be pengemis in our own country, and so on and so forth. Okay. You can think or you can pass judgment whatever you like about them or why they arrive at that conclusion. You still need their votes. And actually, most importantly, I don't think you should penalize them because they are a product of a system, the end system, that continuously manufacture this fear. If we want to go into general election and you promise a fair, equal country to all, you cannot marginalize or leave out this 40%, and you have to make sure that their fear, which you know is unfounded anyway, are addressed. So what I'm saying all this while is that you cannot skirt around this issue. It is a very important issue. The obstacle that BN has so effectively used for 50 years to stop change. We cannot go to Putradaya by saying, I'm not going to address this. You have to confront it. Confronting this issue and this unfounded fear does not mean that you become racial and racist in your approach. Because their fear is the same, and their concern is the same with everyone else's concern. It's about jobs, it's about economy, it's about livelihood. And those problems, the root causes are mismanagement, bad governance, and so on and so forth. But you have to articulate this in a manner that persuade them that having a regime change will definitely make it better for them. And how do you do it? There must be a clarity in what we can do for them. And you can articulate this and you can develop programs which are inclusive and non-racial in our approach, yet at the same time, you tackle this unfounded fear head-on. That's what I meant by the Malay question. And there is a consensus, an overwhelming acceptance within Pakatan Harapan that we have to do that. We cannot be in denial and say that these are BTN and so on. It is BTN, but it has been done very effectively. And we have to cross that stage. And that's why I think we have to articulate, we have to convince the non-Malays, the urban, people who have fear that the discourse will be brought back to race approach. We have to convince, and I think once we show that our prescriptions to their problems, these Malay fear problems, is not at all racial and racist in approach, I think it will be accepted overwhelmingly by the public. The problem before is that there was hesitance on the part of Pakatan Rakyat previously. There was hesitance because it's sensitive, it's like the moment you pick a difficult issue, there is no clear winner. If you go to war, usually you want to go to a war that you can win hands down. You really don't want to go to a war which is hanging like Korean War and you don't know who actually wins. And the Malay issue is one of it. You may actually make some breakthrough, but you will get wounded along the way. That scares politicians. I'm saying you cannot do that. You have to go in, you have to bite the bullet, you will have to manage the cynicism of the non-Malays because they fear that, is this going back to all the Malay, Ketuhanan Melayu and so on? You have to manage their cynicism, yet you have to convince the Malays that there can be a better future without the end, without the racist approach. And I think once you do that, what is most important, it's not just about winning the next government. We are at the junction when we can rewrite the society. If you can do that, if you can convince the fence-sitters Malays that it is more effective to ensure a better livelihood for them through practical policies which are non-racial, which gives better support and opportunity, but not racial in approach, I think we can get past this ghost of race politics forever. So that's why, to me, to the younger ones of us, we are the radicals in Pakatan Harapan. We are loud and we are the radical. We are telling our elders in Pakatan Harapan, we are not going to take it anymore. I can't understand the elder ones because they went through many years of sensitivity. The AP have been painted as anti-Chinese. PKR has been, we have been painted as everything. So I understand their fear. But I think we are willing, the second liners are willing to confront this issue. So in the next few months, I think we will articulate these programs, specific ones, and I think we will convert the 40%, at least the majority of them, of the fence-sitters, Malay fence-sitters, and after that, the job to Putrajaya will become a bit more realistic. Thank you.
Okay. You once talked about how the vernacular education debate sudah lapuk, like it's no longer an important debate. So my question is, what does that exactly mean? Does that mean that when PKR comes into power, vernacular education would be empowered, or would it be just existent and we slowly move into a single stream system?
Okay, no, I think the issue is, first of all, you have to make the national school a school of choice. I don't dispute that ideally, you should want Malaysian students to go to the national schools. for integration, for nation building, so on and so forth. However, the keyword is choice. So that means that there are other choices, and vernacular education is protected by the Constitution. So that you have to remember. And secondly, you also have to look beyond vernacular education, because in reality today, there are far more options, not just vernacular education, but you're also talking about private Islamic schools, you're also talking about madrasas, tahfiz, Quran schools, various other options, and even homeschooling is a reality today in Malaysia. So if you are stuck with this dichotomy of vernacular school or single type schools, then you're not actually facing the real problem that is out there. So that is why, to me, you have to, if you want to talk about this, you have to talk about making the national school the school of choice. That was how Singapore, for example, overcome the problem. When they closed down the Malay, Tamil and Chinese schools in Singapore, they made sure that 90% of the Singaporean kids, whether they're Malay, Chinese or Indian, send their kids to national schools. But that's not the case in Malaysia today. So that's why we should not be trapped into this debate about closing down vernacular schools and all that. So that is the real issue that we are facing.
Okay, before we take a 5-minute break, so you could gather your thoughts and just discuss with your friends what questions to ask. First, you could follow and participate in the conversation on Twitter by hashtagging MPUK, so it's hashtag MPUK. And I just want to remind the people who want to ask questions later that you try to minimize your question to a 60-second question. So just your name, or even that's optional. Just directly to the point and only the context if it's necessary. So as many people could ask as possible. So we'll rejoin and reconvene in 5 minutes. Thank you.